for? What is this tool that y'all are using?
They just switched it. It's called, it used to be called Bevy, but they didn't upgrade. And this is our first one with the upgrade, so it is acting a little finicky for us too. But
Blame it on the tool.
yeah,
I was going to. It can't be my internet, right?
no, yeah, that's how I felt too. I'm like, I've been on Zoom calls all day and I didn't have any issues. But
Yeah.
we'll play by ear. And I noticed that if you stop sharing your face, that it tends to work. But the audio has been great with you, Milton. So
Okay.
hopefully it keeps us moving in the right direction. So handing it off to you. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, my face is very important so you can catch the joke. So I have to leave it on. Otherwise, there's no point. But hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. And I would love to stay interactive during this session. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. But my name is Milton. I work for SalesLabX here in Austin, Texas. We are Salesforce Partners. So our bread and butter is a lot of on the Sales Cloud, Marketing Cloud, account engagement side. And where we're a little different from others is that here's this thing. Austin, but I think y'all all know Austin. We basically do design work, tech stack orchestration, and attribution modeling. And where we're kind of unique is we don't do project or hourly based work. We think that's the wrong incentive. So we actually have a flat rate subscription model where people come in and they pay us a flat rate, and then we basically do all of this work for them for an unlimited basis. Not really going to pitch you all that much, but the main thing that I want you all to think about and why my perspective and our perspective is a little different is we don't do implementations or projects where we go in and deploy and leave. So we have a very much of a, the vision of and the perspective of someone who's actually working with sales and working in marketing and working with leadership and, in the trenches battling, I guess. So I'm a very jaded person, as a lot of the stuff I'll go through today will be. So that's a big thing. We're actively managing a bunch of stuff. We talk about revenue attribution modeling a lot. That's, a big thing for us, as I would imagine it's for a lot of y'all. So, and I handle strategy on a few accounts. So I'll go into accounts, a lot being B2B, and I'll help them get more out of their marketing cloud, conversion rate optimization, MQL, SQL, funnel stuff. I'll stop there. And then maybe, does anybody have any questions or comments or concerns or anything they want to add? I don't know, Michelle, is this an interactive bunch or do I have to pull it out of them?
Sometimes you might have to pull it out.
Okay. Is everybody in this room like a Pardot or Salesforce admin, or what's the audience I'm working with here today?
I think you have a little bit of everything. You have some consultants, you have some end users. You have some people like Terry on the nonprofit side who interact with these tools as well. Something that I'm curious about before we go into your presentation.
Yeah.
Go ahead. A lot of our users love to hear if there's any growth opportunities for them. So I was hoping you can share if you had any openings for anybody who may be interested in like taking the more consultative route of account engagement and on marketing cloud in general.
Yeah, for sure. We always have roles open. The biggest role that we're always looking for is roles like mine. and there's another role, so like that are basically a liaison between our Salesforce admins, our account engagement admins, our designers and our coders, and the client, right? So we call them account coordinators, marketing coordinators. I think they're called account coordinators now, and strategy specialists like myself. So, if you're the type of person who knows Salesforce and Pardot, but also knows how to talk to people who don't know Salesforce and Pardot, and when somebody says, I want a report for knowing my revenue, if you were able to ask the follow-up questions on, hey, what do you actually mean by that? Those are roles that we're hiring for constantly.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And I actually think that's the biggest need in the market. So the certifications are cool. Technical competency is cool. But boots on the ground, talk to a marketing leader. They don't know what an MQL is, and they have to get their sales team to also agree on what an MQL is. That's where the money's at and the growth opportunity is. Cool, but good. Any other questions?
I think we're good at this time.
This group. Come on, buds. Come on. All right, let's keep going. I always like to start some of my webinars with this quote where it's from one of my favorite books. It's called Stillness Speaks, right here. So my belief is most of this time in Salesforce, account engagement, a lot of these tools, people tend to way overcomplicate and way over engineer it. I'll take some shots at consultants a lot of times, especially the ones that charge by the hour. I feel like sometimes there's like this economic incentive to make things really complicated and over-engineering. Nobody in this group. So my biggest thing in everything I do whenever I go into an organization and talk about is this next slide. So you can ignore everything I talk about as long as you deeply understand the next slide, okay? So you can hang up, you can leave, you can stop talking to me, as long as the next slide y'all understand, okay? So I'm gonna go to the next slide here, ta-da, right? When you're trying to align two departments like sales and marketing, the number one thing that you wanna do is you wanna make sure everybody has a common definition of the words that they're using, okay? I think a lot of y'all will know, you go into organizations and they'll say, I need more leads. And then you ask sales, what's a lead? And they'll say, oh, you mean the lead record? You ask marketing and they mean like, oh, a lead is somebody with an email address with a score above 50. You ask sales and they'll be like, hey, somebody who's ready to buy something. You have three different departments who all have a different definition of lead. And then you have Salesforce or Pardot admins who are running around with their head cut off, trying to figure out, should I create a custom object? How do I create a custom report that has leads for everybody, right? So the number one thing that I notice in going to, I think at this point, over 100 organizations, I think myself personally at this point, but hyperbole maybe, is that people start building reports and processes before they know the things that they're building reports and processes for. Right. So I go into organizations all the time where they say, I need more MQLs. I need more leads. I want to know. I just spent 2 hours today talking to an organization where they were like, I want to know how much revenue comes from my conference. Or I want to know how valuable a conference is. Okay. Do you mean by like how many net new email addresses you got? Do you mean how many existing opportunities got influenced by this? So it's making sure that people have a common definition of these words that a lot of people take for granted. That's the number one thing I do when I go into a new organization is sit down. I have something that's called a definition session, and I interview the different departments, and I get everybody's feedback on what they think the different words mean. Questions, comments, concerns so far?
What's the most common item that you see missing a clear definition? Is there one, or are they all?
Two. One is MQL, right? One is MQL. They try to use scoring. They try to use these weird things. But then if somebody comes in from a conference, it's an immediate MQL. And I'm like, okay, well, like, is it? And it's like, if they have to fill out the form, they need to give you all this information. But if they're a warm body that you meet at a conference, it's an immediate hot MQL, right? So MQL definition being all over the place. So, Michelle, I'm going to need you to do this throughout this whole thing because these are good. And the second thing, which a lot of times doesn't happen because it's marketing or IT leading these conversations, is when a lead gets converted into an opportunity. So sometimes it's, they replied to the email. Sometimes it's if they have a need. And because especially when you work in B2B with extended sales cycles, and if you're judging marketing or a campaign by its ability to convert into opportunities, but you have wildly varying degrees of when an opportunity gets created, it's very hard to do an apples to apples comparison of like how much influence or how effective a campaign is. So those are my two things, Michelle, is MQL definition and opportunity conversion definition.
Love it. I have issues with those myself.
Yeah? What is it getting and those two things are where marketing and sales basically collide. What do y'all have right now do you have a definition for MQLs that's pretty streamlined?
Working on it. So I just got into a small org that did not have a lot of structure. So we're working on building out these definitions now. So your session meant a lot to me. That's why I wanted to have the group see this here.
Awesome. Cool. Any other questions? Anybody else still just now building it? Anybody with the mature org that already has definitions? And when I mean definitions, these are the most common ones that I'm talking about.
I do see a chat from Terry saying, in the nonprofit world, it's hard to even understand what it means. And yet we clearly have marketing, awareness raising, and donors sales.
Beautiful. Okay, Terry, since you mentioned nonprofit, I'm going to show you a couple of things that I do for nonprofits, okay? So the first thing that I'm going to do, let me see, make sure there's no, because I love nonprofits. If y'all have a nonprofit, ping me on it, right? But because it's like, I get to absolve my sins, basically, right? So one of the things you want to do in a nonprofit is you want to make sure that you have free for nonprofit. But you can see right here, right? In sales, in a traditional, not in a for-profit, they have pipelines and they have quotas, right? That's like a lot of my background in, but lately I've been working with a lot of nonprofits. I guess the budgets have been increasing, but you can see what we've done here. If I have, let's say you're major, and if you're not in a nonprofit, this is the same thing. And I don't care if you're marketing or IT or anything. This is how you drive yourself back to revenue. Okay, so let's say your goal for major or general donors, Terry, is $400,000 in a year. Your average gift amount is $4,175. If you don't know what your average gift amount is, you should run that report, Terry. This is how you look cool in your org. Run that report, and hopefully gifts are opportunities. Divide, get that average, and look at what we have. Very simple formula. What is my goal divided by what is my average gift amount? So how many gifts do I need? I need 95 gifts or opportunities. Now, if I have basically in average, we want to say we want 3x pipeline coverage, meaning if I want 95 gifts at $4,000, I have to create 287 opportunities. Okay? Terry, you asked me, how does this apply to nonprofits? Look, right? And then so if I want 287 potential gifts, I need 862 leads. Then 1/3 of them will convert into potential gifts, and 1/3 of that will turn into opportunities. This gives me $400,000 in revenue, in gifts and pledges. Yeah. So this right here is now you have a funnel, but for nonprofit, right? And very easy formulas I'm using here. And then as far as a flow that I like for nonprofits, what I like, and it depends on the type of nonprofit you are and what you're looking to get done. But basically, and we can talk about it offline, Terry, but basically, I like this right here, which is basically somebody downloads a piece of content from y'all, then somebody gets notified, goes into working status on the lead. You try to set up two-way communication, book the intro conversation with them. That's when you convert into an opportunity, blah, 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 blah. But definitely, I know my averages, my cost to acquire new people. We even divide a campaign into new donors. And awesome. Yes, perfect. Exactly. You want to build that same funnel, though. Right? Thank you. Thanks for the question. Any other questions about these definitions, or if you think it doesn't apply to you, or it's weirdly defined for you? Look at how much Terry got by just asking one question.
Where do you see from the MQL to SAL? This is where, and I think you'll focus on this at some point too in this presentation in general, but of people's definitions and who does what there and what actually defines these. What are some examples of kind of defining those specifically?
Yeah. So so just so everybody knows, just because so we don't use jargon here, MQL stands for marketing accepted lead. And basically what that means is Michelle, y'all, maybe somebody else, everybody, in the marketing side is basically saying, hey, I think this is worthy of a human being following up. Right? That's what this basically, in a very broad sense of the term, is. The digital team, our marketing, is saying, hey, this is somebody that we think a human being is worth following up on. SAL basically is sales. A lot of times it means sales accepted lead, meaning that Michelle says, hey, Milton, follow up on this lead. I think it's good. Then sales looks at it and says, like, and I look at it and I'm like, yep, Michelle, thanks for this. This is good. I'm going to follow up with it. Here's the biggest gap and the biggest leakage that happens right here is the acceptance criteria. It's vague and undefined. I've run sales teams, if you can't tell by my great personality here, right? And I've run SDR teams and I've built SDR teams from the ground up. And basically, like those sales teams, their sales is very gut driven. Marketing, a lot of times, is very data driven, right? So what I would say is having very cleanly defined criteria of what is an SAL. It can't be up to the sales rep to define if it's accepted or not. You have to have like their annual revenues above this size, their email didn't bounce, it's something that's basically a binary. It can't be held to any sort of interpretation. It basically has to be like something y'all agree on. It can't be like I looked at it and I decided it was good or not. Is that what's happening right now, Michelle?
No, I think it's easy for the interpretation piece to slide in, even when you try to define sometimes.
Yep. And this is where, as a Salesforce admin or as a Pardot admin, you're using the levers of lead status not being a plain text field. You're having checkbox. If somebody marks something as DQ, they're marking why it's DQ, right? So whenever I do this type of funnel, what I like to do is I always, at every stage of the funnel, so let's say you mark it as an MQL and then sales says it's not an MQL. I make sure that I have specific disqualifying reasons that they have to select from every stage of the funnel. So if you send over an MQL and sales marks it as not sales accepted, they have to pick one of these reasons why. Same thing for every one of these steps, right? So you want to try to like neatly define what's happening. But that is a back and forth that you have to have. Okay? When I'm looking at this funnel, the two things that I want visibility to is the conversion rate. How many of my leads go into MQL? How many of my MQLs go into SAL? And how many of my SALs go to opportunity? And how many of my opportunities go to closed won? That's the first thing I want. I want and need to have visibility to how many. The second thing is velocity, which is how fast. On average, how fast do I go from a lead to an MQL? How fast do I go from an MQL to an SAL? How fast do I go from an SAL to an opportunity? How fast do I go from an opportunity to closed won? Those are the two things that every org I'm going into, my first role and responsibility is to make sure that they have line of sight and visibility to both of those metrics on every stage of the funnel. If they don't, I'm not doing anything else till I get those two things locked and loaded. Everybody have visibility to both of those metrics for their full funnel? If not, you might want to tell me, hey, Milton, why are you living in an idealistic world? I can't get this because XYZ. I'm taking questions in the chat now, too. I have it open. I figured it out where it was. Let me look at the roles here. So we got, okay, Pardot admin on Pardot admin marketing cloud, finishing up work on another company. Okay, cool. Okay, cool. So a lot of Pardot admins, right? Just so y'all know, from a Pardot perspective, y'all probably know this already, but it's very tempting to go in and try to use this. Do not use this. Thank you. Do not use this. This means nothing, right? Why? Hey, Milton, awesome, but this looks exactly like what you're showing me, and it's pretty and it's nice. Why? Remember the first thing that I said, right? I said, more important than anything, it's defining these things. So when you look at this, even though it looks the same, what is a prospect? What is a marketing qualified? What is a sales qualified? What is a one deal? Do these these are definitions that you are not setting. So they can't be, and if I have more time, and maybe I do have time because nobody's asking any questions, these are not definitions that you have set yourself, so they can't be applicable to you. My wife, who's a product manager at Dell, super smart, MBA, very nice lady, I guess. Why did I describe her like this? Very competent in her role. She always says, the thing about enterprise software is the user and the buyer are two different roles. The user and the buyer are two different roles. Okay? So when you look at this report right here, this report, and a lot of the stuff that Salesforce builds, is built for the buyer. Meaning, this looks really good on a deck when they're giving you a demo to your VP of marketing or your VP of sales. Shout out to everybody in this session today when they actually try to give them this report. This is what we call something for the buyer, not the user, right? So I would not use this. This is something you need to build on your own. Cool. I like the ew. Okay. Any questions on the definitions here? How to measure conversion rate? Okay. One thing I want you to make sure of, if you're a Pardot admin and if you're trying to get more into that strategic side or to help you solve some headache, whenever you're doing these definition sessions and you're looking at conversion rate, you want to make sure you're talking to your stakeholders about what the denominator and what the numerator is. No. How do you say your name, Joel? I'm going to say Joel, if that's okay. Joel, right? Joel. Perfect. Thank you. So, no, Joel. You cannot. There is no, I speak in hyperbole. No, there's nothing you should use. Right? There are things you can do, but not really. And I'll tell you why. MQL is not a field in Salesforce. There's no field out of the box for MQL, and there's nothing that are triggering MQL. That itself will tell you that there's no out of the box for that. Here's another reason why. The fundamental issue with Salesforce is the underlying architecture, because it's based off of this, like, and I don't want to bore y'all. It's based off of this, like, really, maybe I will bore y'all because y'all are smart people, right? When Salesforce first came out, it was something that you bought and you installed a server on your server with space, right? So it was like, so space was a really big thing. So anytime you put something in Salesforce, it's always one in, one out, right? It's like, it doesn't, you ever notice why there's not a lot of historical data in Salesforce? It's like, well, you updated the lead status, so now you can't tell that it was an MQL 3 months ago. Because it's not saving a record of every single thing that happens, because the architecture is built for a time where you're saving all of this data on some server and you're running out of space, right? So I say that, Joel, to say, like, a lot of the historical trending data isn't built into Salesforce, like the conversion and velocity, because it's really an outdated structure and architecture. So it's very hard to get that data. So you have to basically build that yourself. Now, Joel, how do I get velocity from lead to MQL? This is where I say you have to really have a good alignment with your stakeholder. And let me give you an example here. For me, whenever I come up with MQL criteria, Michelle, my favorite thing is not, I want to do a webinar that's called Scoring is Dead, Long Live Scoring, because like I hate scoring for MQL criteria, okay? What I always do for MQL criteria is a high value form, okay? So now what I say is if they fill out this form, then change MQL date to today's date, okay? So then if I run a report, I can say in January, I generated 50 MQLs. Cool? In January. Now, let's say that I generate that MQL, I send it to sales, and sales marks it as a disqualified lead. Okay? Or non-responsive. Now, 3 months later, they come and they fill out that form again. Should that MQL date change? Or should that MQL date stay static? Let's say that your leadership says like, well, I want that to count to a new MQL. So I want that MQL date to go from January to March. It sounds like a very simple thing. It sounds like oh yeah, obviously I want it to count again because it's a new MQL. Now what's going to happen? That same leader in the end of the year is going to say, hey, Michelle, I want you to show me conversion rate through the whole year, and I want you to show month over month trending. What's going to happen? Your conversion rate is going to look lower in January because those MQLs now became March MQLs because the MQL date changed. Right? So you could have had 50 MQLs in January, then you run the report in March, and now you have 47 MQLs in January. And your leader is like, hey, Michelle, hey, Joel, why did my MQLs from January go lower? Well, because you made this small, inconsequential decision, right? When you go into Pardot, and I'm sure y'all are all aware now of the fancy completion actions, conditional completion actions on forms, right? You're on a form, and you have a choice where you can say, hey, I want the MQL date. And let's see if I have that field here. Let's say let's see if there's a date field I can use in general, right? Let's say demo requested date. Imagine that says demo requested date. I have two options. I can say, anytime somebody fills out this form, change the MQL date to today's date. Or I can make a conditional group, and I can say, hey, if I get super hyped about this, but I'm a morning person, so towards the end of the day, I need like some vibes to like keep going. Or I can do this right here where I'm saying, hey, demo requested date is empty. Then set prospect custom date to say, oh wait, hold on. Demo requested date. Demo requested date to submission date. So you have two options on this form. You can say, anytime somebody fills out this form, even if they have an MQL date previously, always override it. Or you can set up this second one. It's like, if the MQL date is empty, then when they do the submission date. This is such a small, inconsequential, random decision that could have huge downstream impact to people's comp, to if your CMO keeps their job or not, to a bunch of stuff. But look at the technical competency. It's such a small thing to do. Okay? This is why we don't charge by the hour or by the project, because it doesn't take me but 2 minutes to set either one up. But asking the right question and wrangling all the cats to make the decisions is the hard part. Right? So to answer your question, Joel, there is no out-of-the-box way that is 100% that is accurate to you to do velocity and conversion rate, but because you have to make decisions like this. Should it be one funnel and therefore one definition, or can it be multiple funnels from multiple sales processes? Right? So basically Terry's, and this happens a lot in nonprofit and in a lot of things, right? So in this example, basically they're like, okay, Milton, I have these funnels. I have different types of funnels. I have major general donations. I have payroll. Then I have monthly, and I have matching. Then I have peer-to-peer donations. I have these different types of donations. Should all of these be different funnels, or should they be one funnel for all of them? My rule of thumb in general is when possible, minimize variables. When possible, minimize variables. So if you can have one funnel, and I'm working with that nonprofit Terry to have one funnel, They're fighting me tooth and nail, but I'm fighting back, right? So when possible, I would have one funnel, but when not possible, then you should do more than one. It's okay to have more than one funnel. And as a Salesforce or Pardot admin, how this represents itself is something called record types in Salesforce. Opportunity record types, lead record types, contact record types. But whenever I go into an organization and I see a bunch of record types or custom objects, I call those digital artifacts of somebody who just says yes to everybody. And I can go into an organization, I can tell the last 5 fired sales VPs and CMOs based on the fields and the custom objects that they created, right? So basically, I'm saying, Terry, you can create multiple funnels, but when possible, create one funnel.
I think the theme of everything you've said is about less complexity. You got to question it all.
That's it. That's the whole thing, right? And in general in life too, right? Like I wake up in the morning, I have 6 of these outfits, I wear it every day, minimizes variables, that's it. So when I want to A/B test, I know which lever is actually pulling the actual result. Okay? So you want to normalize and minimize as many variables as possible. You're absolutely right, Michelle.
Milton, what do you do when like nobody in the organization is taking accountability or definitions, or there is like definitions, but like they're not being enforced, right? So like somebody lower put in the work to schedule 1 million meetings. We have our Google Doc or Mural board or whatever, and everything's clear. Everybody signed off, but like we're not changing our ways, right? Like what do you say to those people that, to use your word, are jaded from the experience of having to get to the point where it's defined, but they're not seeing the organizational changes happen? Like what would you recommend to those people? Because I feel a lot of the people that are in this line of business, it isn't like they're purposely trying to, skew reports or like not give the right numbers to executives, but a lot of the times it's a struggle to get the whole bus going in one direction.
Beautiful. I love that. That actually is where all the money is hiding, right? What you just said right there, right? And remember the key, and I have a very unique perspective, and SalesLabX has a unique perspective because we don't get paid by the hour or by the project, meaning that we just want the subscription going. And how you get the subscription going for us, right? The economic incentive is turned around, is that you have to make sure that everybody is aligned so that you can actually show results. Because we've done this for millions of leads and contacts. The only way you actually drive revenue is by that. So I have a blueprint. My blueprint is a change management blueprint, which is first have everything very tightly defined with all the different stakeholders, especially sales. Then I meet individually with the sales leadership without marketing. I get their buy-in, right? Then I have them sign off on what the expectation is for their sales reps. Then I roll out the new process, and the first 90 days, I'm involved in the process myself. So what I do is I build a report, what I call a stick report. A stick report. We have carrots and we have sticks, right? I like to build a stick report. And basically what this is an exception report in Salesforce of everybody who's not following the process. Then what I do is I get buy-in from my sales leadership, my sales VP. Sometimes I work directly with the CRO or the CEO. And I say, hey, for that first week, I'm going to build a scheduled report in Salesforce. And I'm going to have this email automatically go out on Monday mornings of everybody who's not following this process. And CEO or CRO, I need you to do me a favor. When you get that report, I want you to reply all. Right? I'm on it too. And then, so they're going to reply on. They're going to say, hey, Terry, good job. I see you're not on this list. Hey, Jolie, where's your team? What's going on? Then I do a follow-up, a piggyback on that. And I say, hey, Jolie, no worries. I'm going to follow up and I'm going to set up 15 minutes to make sure you're aligned on how you see what I'm doing there? I'm making sure that when I say something, it's basically like the CEO or the sales VP has said it. But very in the weeds there, but the main thing is that you want to make sure that you have a intimate relationship with the department heads on, especially in sales. You need to make, and a lot of times these projects, you're being hired from marketing or IT. That ain't it. That ain't it. You got to get sales leadership on your side, but you have to come up with that rollout strategy. Do you do that, Mark? Have you seen that work, or like, do you usually get Salesforce buy-in? I mean, do you get sales buy-in, or do you find that they usually stop showing up and they're not following it and they're not, or is it other people, not sales?
I think it really depends on the organization, but I would say, I don't know, I feel weird saying it because obviously from my background is marketing, so obviously like it's easy to say, oh, sales doesn't follow the rules or whatever, but like I can see both sides, right? And so a lot of the times it comes to like, well, if my boss isn't checking Salesforce, why do I have to do this extra work that marketing is asking me to do if my reports are fine, right? So
And what's the
that's what
answer?
I tend to
That's a good
see.
question.
That's what I tend to see, and so you know, you can do, to your point, you can do all the technical configuration you want, and at the end of the day, if nobody logs in or types in or converts or does whatever they're supposed to do in the system, right? Because there's not clear KPIs and clear definitions on when to do certain things, then it all just kind of sits there and, you know, nothing really happens, which we like to avoid.
100%. And I don't think we need to live in a, I think if you talk about a group of people who don't follow the process, it's always sales. So it's not like it's not a yeah, and Terry's saying there, right? Like it's the incentive structure. Absolutely. So what I do is I like to make sure that I'm aligned with the incentive structure, right? So when I go in, one of the things that I do is I always make sure that I always align with them on a pipeline review framework. I am like, hey, what is your pipeline review framework? And what is the quota on pipeline creation? And how do you hold them accountable for the pipeline creation? If sales is being accountable and held accountable for pipeline creation, then all the, like Terry's saying, all the downstream impact will be solved there. You got to make sure the economic incentives are set up like on your side, right? But that's what to be honest, it's always sales. It's always sales. It's always sales that is like the one that's not following the process. And I like what Terry's saying, which is you have to have a process and you have to have economic incentives for sales to follow that process. This is my kind of process I like to do with my sales reps.
It's worse. I mean, my experience comes from high tech, and I'm an engineer, but I observed sales for 30 years in the high tech world. And my opinion is a sales VP's job is to incentivize his sales, but disorient them enough that they have to keep trying because they already figured out how to game the system and slack off in a sense. And so constantly changing the incentive structure, constantly changing the way it's done is the way you keep it sharp and focused. And so those guys will figure out what the game is and hone in on it, and they will game the numbers. And I don't mean that in a negative way. They will perform to make the incentive work, and that makes it a very dynamic environment. And so they're used to the process always changing, and they're used to not following the process, taking the shortcuts, etc. And that's the hard part.
Yeah, 100%. Terry, you've done this before. Yeah, 100%. And one thing that, and one thing to keep in mind, right, is that having run sales teams and SDR teams, you're talking about like, let's say they have like 180 opportunities that somebody's dealing with, right? We're pushing them to talk to 180 people to increase their conversion rate by 1% or 2%. It doesn't actually make mathematical sense for them to do the work either. The problem is, you can see here the revenue is 18 million. If you increase that op conversion rate by 5%, you just made $7 million in revenue, additional revenue. But that's so much churn for the sales reps to do that it's very hard to convince them to have that discipline to do it every single day. It is really hard work to have sales do that, right? And when you talk about sales and you talk about where the revenue is hiding, the number one place where the revenue hides is right here, between the sales and marketing handoff, between account engagement, Pardot, and Salesforce handoff. That's where all the leakage is always at, every time, right? Thanks, Marcus. I'm gonna zoom through this here, right? So this is where all, if I'm you and you take anything away from today's conversation, one, it's defining these words carefully, and two, it's looking at the conversion rate and more deeply aligning these two steps right here. And keeping an eagle eye on both of these conversions right there. Right? I always tell this to my wife, but she never agrees. A good relationship is based on clear owner. You can tell I'm was born in India, but a good relationship comes from clear responsibility, ownership, and accountability. Every person in the funnel has a very clear line of sight of whose job it is to do what. No amount of over engineering, no amount of required fields, no amount of validation, no amount of automations is going to supersede this right here. You can think you're trying to do that. You don't know how many organizations I've gone into and they're like, sales isn't converting leads into opportunities. Let's create a flow or an Apex to automatically convert leads to opportunities. I don't allow it on the accounts I manage. There ain't no way we're going to automate something that you don't have the discipline to do manually. I'm not automating it. I just say no. I'm not automating it. If either you believe it's important and you're doing 25 of them a month, or I'm going to stop sending you MQLs, because there has to be clear ownership and accountability of these steps. I always say just because you can automate something doesn't mean you should. Okay? So you want to make sure there's clear accountability and ownership. I'm going to keep going here, right? So when I showed you that example here, I talked about how do you build in accountability and ownership in how you define things. And I know this is being recorded, so you can come back in here too. And I'm going to do something for y'all too. Like if y'all want to chat, I'm going to put my calendar link in here. I'm not an upsell, but I know I'm long-winded and maybe y'all are after work. So I'm going to put my calendar link here. If y'all want to chat or book some time, you can bookmark that there. But yeah, so you want to build clear accountability and ownership by building a process that breeds that. Okay. Let me zoom out here. Once you build this, you want to build a feedback loop between the departments. What does this mean? This means when I send an MQL to sales, how do I tell if it was good or not? What is that feedback loop? Right? So how do you tell if it moves to SAL? If it doesn't move to SAL, that means it's not good. You have to have a very quick and immediate and evenly defined feedback loop between the two departments. It has to be almost real time. It has to be a very short, like not real time, but like very quick. It has to be like days at most. Feedback loop between the departments to tell if marketing is doing a good job or if sales is doing a good job. You have to build that feedback loop. So when an MQL gets moved over, it either moves to an SAL or it moves to disqualified. How long do they have to do that? 7 days. If they don't move it to an SAL in 7 days or a market is disqualified, what do they have to do? In that 7 days, how many times are they required to touch? Once a day? Once every 2 days? How do you log that they did that? Shannon, I have so many clients sending quantity over quality. And all you're doing is making Zuckerberg rich. That's all you're doing, right? That's all you're doing. Okay? But yes, thank you. Yeah, I can't either, Shannon. I can't address it either. I can't say it either, right? So you have to have that feedback loop. And I always say this, like, there's this, like, I have strong meditation practice, but there's this joke in the meditation circles where they like, If you think you don't have time for meditation, that means you need to spend more time on meditation, right? So my joke when it comes to sales is like, if you go into a structure and you're like, well, we're relationship based, we have a long sales cycle, like there's only a few people doing what we do, like, and so like we can't neatly define it. We can't have structure because it's like so complicated what we do. Ding, ding, ding. You need structure more. Right? So like you need to have that feedback loop. Sometimes people will come and they'll say, hey, my sales cycle could be a year or two long. Cool. What is a leading indicator in the next 30 days to tell you if that lead was good or not? It doesn't need to be the sale, but there needs to be some feedback loop.
Do you see it as updating your definition of MQL to hand that to sales, or is it something else?
Say it again. Is it more than just changing the definition?
Is it usually that feedback piece that you would get? Are you usually going to have to go change a definition in MQL as to why somebody gets handed over, or are there other variables to it, or can multiple things be part of it in general?
Actually, there's one clear answer here. It's I send an MQL over. Sales is agreed on the expectation on their side. Hey, Michelle, you send me, if somebody fills out this get a demo form, I think it's an MQL. We both agree. Then sales says, Michelle, if you send me a requested demo form, I will follow up within 24 hours and I'll follow up 5 times in the next 10 days. If they respond to one of my follow-ups, it's considered sales accepted. If they don't follow up, it's considered disqualified, no response. Basically, what the feedback loop is, the MQL criteria is good, but basically what does sales needs to do? What are some examples of feedback loop in each direction? Basically right here, this is a feedback loop, right? Marketing sends an MQL. So basically you see how I'm defining this? An MQL is that it's a high value form submission. If it's an MQL, then we send them to a BDR, like a sales rep. Does the BDR agree that it's worth following up on? If yes, they move it to an SQL. If no, they mark it as DQ. Then in the end of the month, you run, hey, of my MQLs I sent over, how many are currently in DQ and how many are currently in SQL? That's my feedback loop. Then I go back and I check what is my conversion rate to SQL from Facebook versus webinar versus white paper, etc. This is the feedback loop right here. DQs are telling marketing, stop sending me this. SQLs are telling marketing, send me more of these. I'm going to keep going. Ultimately, what you're trying to do is you're trying to say, hey, I want to know, how do I send more MQLs to sales, or how do I do more SALs? You need to minimize as many variables. Then you need to figure out what things are actually moving the needle. Then you need to pull that lever over and over again. What I find people do is this. Just pulling a bunch of stuff. A/B testing subject lines, changing forms, changing MQL criteria every 2 days, changing what scoring means, right? Pause. If you come up with a scoring criteria and MQL criteria, don't change it for 90 days. I have a rule. I come up with MQL criteria. I don't change it for 90 days no matter what somebody says. I let it breathe. I watch it. I see it. I absorb it. I look at it. Then I see what is impacting this. Then I figure out how do I drive more of this. Then when I have a good understanding of everything, then I pull the lever. I don't just pull levers unless I have a good understanding of what are the things that are actually impacting the KPIs I'm trying to get. All right. I'm going to put this, I built this on just a fun little thing, but I'm going to put this in the chat too. This is my conversion rate calculator, right? I like to set up digital feedback through lead status as the required fields exactly so that we can run reports for the accountability, then change the feedback loop enables. Yeah, exactly. So this is basically exactly what Shannon is saying, is basically this right here. I think it's an MQL. If sales agrees, what do they mark? If sales doesn't agree, what do they do? And how long do they have to tell me if it is good or not? Now, if I look at the conversion rate optimize, the funnel thing that I showed you in the chat, if I'm sending out 100,000 emails and I get a 15% or a 10% open rate, 3% click to open ratio, 20% form submission rate. I'm going to do this real quick. Right? And if I'm looking at how do I increase this, I have a couple of options here. If I increase open rate from 10% to 20%, see the downstream impact? If I change this to 6%, see the downstream impact? Okay? So I'm going to decide which lever I want to do. Do I want to impact the open rate or do I want to impact the click to open ratio? If I say, hey, I think there's a bigger room for improvement in the open rate, and my goal is to get this to 15%, don't change the CTA. Don't spend a bunch of time coming up with new forms and landing pages and all this random stuff. Change the subject line, the pre-header, the sender. Focus on just the things that are going to impact the open rate. Don't try to change a bunch of other stuff downstream. Right? So know what thing you're optimizing for, then relentlessly pull just that and be disciplined. Don't get distracted by side quests. I always do this where I start off slow and then I'm like, boom, 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 I got to get done. Okay, then I do that, right? I talked about that. That's it. That's the whole thing. Right? So recap what I said today. Make sure you have a definition session, even if it's with yourself and with your other stakeholders. Come up with the metrics that are going to be your success metrics. After you have that definition session, build that feedback loop and then iterate. That's it, right? If you do this well, it shouldn't be chaotic. It should be, oh man, I think I'm running into a plateau and there's a diminishing rate of return on my click-through rates. I'm not getting a good of that anymore. Okay, I need to work on my subject line, right? You should have a very disciplined approach to this. This should not be chaotic. It should be iterative. It should be slow. It should be controlled. It should be meticulous. It should not be chaotic. If you feel like you're being chaotic, that means you need to go back to one of the previous steps, which is defining and holding people accountable downstream. I feel like Shannon and I and Terry have lived the same life, so you can also ask them. Okay, I got 3 minutes and open to any questions, even if it's not if it wasn't covered. Or Michelle, if you think I covered anything on the first webinar of this and I didn't cover it now, you want to tell me?
No, I think you hit a lot of that again. Something I was taking a note on that I'm not sure if it got circled back through as other questions came up, but you were talking about with your definition sessions and doing the conversion rate, something about making sure everyone knows the numerator and denominator. And so I don't know if there was more detail behind that.
Good. Yes. Great. Good. So basically, when you say, hey, what is my conversion rate from lead to MQL? Okay. So whenever you do a percentage, it's basically the total size is the denominator, and then what is good is the numerator, right? So basically, what are you, for example, somebody will come to me and they'll say, hey, what was my conversion rate from lead to MQL? And I'll say, okay, what are you considering what is the window that you want to measure by? Like if a lead was created, so let's say it takes on average 90 days to convert a lead into an MQL. If you run that report in 60 days, right, then the conversion rate is going to be much lower. So like, do you want to basically say the denominator of the total leads is any lead that was created over 90 days ago? Or should the denominator be every lead and it doesn't, and like that, it's basically every lead? Mm-hmm. Do you want to only count leads that are marked that didn't bounce? Or do you want to count spam too? Do you like what is the total the denominator that you're counting? Right? Now, and I'll tell you where this goes a lot is hey, what is my lead to opportunity conversion rate? Now look, if you're working lead to opportunity conversion rate, opportunity can have 5 different contacts in it. So you can have one opportunity, but 5 MQLs that are associated with that. How do you want to count the conversion rate there? Is marketing dealt with all 5 of them, but marketing's only getting credit for 1? So does it look like, hey, I sent over 5 MQLs and 1 opportunity got created. That seems bad. You know, so you have to like have that definition of like what is each stage of the funnel and what you're counting as, right? So if somebody says, hey, Michelle, what is my MQL to opportunity conversion rate? Well, is every MQL convert is 1, or is it every MQL from the domain? Is it every like how are you counting that? And is an opportunity that they're a contact role on the opportunity, or they're the primary contact? There's nuance there. That's what I mean by denominator and numerator.
Yeah, that plays back into where, I mean, in general, you're constantly training those that you're working with, and not just because of these definition sessions, but some people don't even know what that date means, what this date means, what that field means in general. And so pulling that into your definitions and overall understanding of this.
But hey, Michelle, and you know, the funny thing is they don't know what it means. They don't know how that gets there, but they'll tell you to make it increase it. Yes, absolutely. So like that's the thing that I think you need to really and if you haven't, Michelle, have you mapped out your process already?
Still working on it. I'm in an org where I am literally building fields that didn't exist because there was not a process and not any definition and funnel reporting at this time. So
yeah. And if you want to gut check with me, just book time, and if like once you have it, like a very rough draft, you're like, hey Milton, does this look accurate? My favorite thing to do is poke holes and stuff. So like, you're like, hey Milton, like what's gonna happen when I deploy this? Like, how am I gonna look silly? I'm gonna fight for this hard, and I'm gonna give them the report, and then I'm gonna look silly because I can't get this. What are those silly situations I want to let my leadership know of ahead of time? Because they'll point them out.
Yes.
So yeah, if you want to do that, you can book some
For
time.
sure.
Too, but yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Milton. This was a wonderful presentation. We have a recording that we will send out, and any other little links that we put in the chat here, we'll make sure to follow up and send resources to the group here. We thank everyone for attending as well. And also, I had put in the chat, but I can repaste here at the bottom, our next meeting where Salesforce will be presenting some, and we'll have an in-person call with some other groups involved too. But thank you all for attending today, and thank you very much, Milton. This was great.
Of course. Thanks for the invite. Always, whenever you need me, ping me. I'm always bored sitting at home. So
thanks, Milton. Appreciate it.
Thanks, y'all. Keep fighting the good fight.
All
Bye.
right.
Thanks, Michelle.
Have a great night, everyone. Bye.